The cold click of handcuffs, the weight of steel against skin, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal when you've spent your entire life defending the very freedoms those cuffs are supposed to protect. This was the reality for General Amara Johnson, one of the highest-ranking black women in the U.S. military, a woman who had commanded troops in war zones, who had medals pinned to her chest for bravery under fire, now standing in a suburban parking lot, wrists locked behind her back like she was nothing more than a suspect. Her crime? Talking back. 2 local cops had stopped her that night, claiming she fit the description of a petty thief. She showed her ID, her Pentagon badge, even explained calmly who she was, but instead of apologizing, the officers decided her dignity was the real threat. They mocked her, they pushed her, and when she dared to demand respect, they snapped those cuffs around her wrists. Phones were recording, strangers gasped, a decorated general shackled in front of her own community. But what those officers didn't realize was this: Amara Johnson was not a woman you underestimated twice, because one phone call, a single, measured call to the Pentagon, would soon unravel their entire world. This is a story of justice, of arrogance meeting its match, of how power can be abused, and how it can be reclaimed. Before we dive deeper, I just want to say something from the heart. I work hard to bring you these powerful, emotional stories, stories that reveal the fight for dignity and truth. If you appreciate them, please take a moment to subscribe. It truly means the world to me, and it helps me keep shining a light on justice. Now let's go back to the beginning of that night. The evening air was crisp with autumn chill as Amara Johnson stepped out of the small community hall. The fundraiser for veterans had been a warm gathering, old friends, stories of service, laughter mixed with tears. She had shaken hands with young recruits who looked at her with awe, and hugged mothers who had lost sons to war. For Amara, these nights were grounding. They reminded her why she served. She wore no uniform tonight, just jeans, a navy jacket, and simple sneakers. To anyone passing by, she looked like any other woman in her 40s grabbing a quick snack after an event. That was exactly how she liked it. Rank was heavy. Sometimes anonymity was a blessing. The fluorescent glow of the corner convenience store beckoned as she crossed the lot. Inside, she picked up bottled water and a protein bar. The cashier, a teenager with earbuds dangling, barely glanced at her. Ordinary, quiet. But as Amara stepped back into the parking lot, keys in hand, the world shifted. Red and blue lights cut through the darkness. The low growl of a police cruiser's engine. 2 officers stepping out, boots heavy on asphalt. Her heart didn't race, not yet. Years of military service had taught her to assess, not to panic. She straightened her posture instinctively. "Ma'am," one officer barked, his flashlight beam cutting across her face. "We need to speak with you." Amara shielded her eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" "You fit the description," the second officer snapped. His hand hovered too close to his holster. "Female suspect. Possible theft." Amara blinked, stunned. "Theft? I just came from inside. You can check the receipt." She held up her small plastic bag, but they weren't interested. Their eyes narrowed, suspicion hardening into something uglier. Now," the first officer demanded, calmly. Amara reached into her jacket and pulled out her wallet. She handed over her driver's license, and then, without hesitation, her military ID. The Pentagon clearance badge gleamed faintly under the streetlights. The officer squinted, then smirked. "Military? What are you, a clerk?" "I am a general," Amara said evenly. Her voice carried weight, but she kept it calm. She had dealt with young, arrogant soldiers before. Authority wasn't always recognized until you proved it. But instead of stepping back, the officer scoffed. "General, right." He tossed the badge back into her hands carelessly. "Lady, don't play games with us." The second officer circled closer, his voice dripping with disdain. "Don't get smart. Around here, you answer questions. You don't give orders." Amara felt the first stirrings of anger. She had commanded entire battalions. She had held the lives of men and women in her hands. And here she was, being treated like a liar, like an intruder, in the very country she had sworn to protect. "I've identified myself. You have no grounds to detain me," she said firmly. That was the spark. The words they decided were talking back. The officers moved fast. One grabbed her arm, twisting it painfully behind her. The other snapped the cold steel cuffs around her wrists. Gasps rose from across the lot as bystanders froze, phones raised. Amara inhaled sharply but did not resist. She stood taller, even in cuffs, her eyes steady. But deep inside, a storm raged. Because this was not just about her. This was about every young soldier who had looked up to her as proof that the system could be better. This was about every black woman told she was too loud, too defiant, too much, and as the officers pushed her toward the cruiser, she knew one thing for certain: this was not going to end the way they thought. What would you have done if you were in General Johnson's shoes at this moment? Stay calm like she did, or fight back against the injustice? Let me know in the comments. The night air grew colder as the cuffs bit into Amara's wrists. The metal was tight, deliberately so, pressing bone against steel. She could feel the blood pulsing beneath her skin. The officers didn't care. They shoved her forward, guiding her toward the cruiser like she was prey being herded into a cage. Unbelievable, one muttered under his breath. Mouthy types always think they're above the law. The words cut, but Amara's face remained stone. She had been in war zones where bullets cracked through the night, where life and death hinged on a single order. She refused to give them the satisfaction of breaking her composure. Still, humiliation burned. The eyes of strangers bore down on her. Phones hovered in the air like silent witnesses. Somewhere, a child's voice whispered, "Why are they arresting her?" The question twisted like a knife, because there was no answer, not one that made sense, not one rooted in truth. Inside the cruiser, the air reeked of stale coffee and sweat. They shoved her into the backseat. Her knees hit the hard partition. The cuffs dug deeper. "Where are you taking me?" Amara asked, her voice steady. "Station. You can explain your attitude there," the first officer sneered, slamming the door shut. Attitude. That was their word for dignity, their word for resistance, their word for a black woman refusing to shrink. As the engine rumbled to life, Amara closed her eyes. She forced her breathing slow, in, out, control the rhythm. That discipline, honed through decades of military training, became her shield. But her mind raced. These men had no idea who she was, and they thought she was powerless. Back at the scene, a crowd was forming. Bystanders murmured. A few shouted. One man called out, "She said she's a general. Let her go." The officers ignored them, but the phones kept recording. Every shove, every sneer, every insult was being captured in high definition, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Amara knew those recordings would matter. Later, much later, but first, she had to endure. At the station, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The walls smelled faintly of bleach and fear. They pulled her out of the cruiser roughly, ignoring the sharp intake of breath as her shoulders strained. She was led through the entrance like a trophy on display, every step echoing across the linoleum floor. A desk sergeant glanced up, eyebrows furrowing. "Who's this? Resisting?" One officer spat. "Mouthy. Gave us trouble outside a convenience store." Amara lifted her chin. Her voice rang clear, even with the cuffs still tight. "I am Major General Amara Johnson, United States Army, and this is an unlawful arrest." The room froze. For a split second, silence hung heavy. The sergeant's eyes flicked from her face to the badges clipped to her jacket. Doubt crept in, but the arresting officer barked, "Don't listen to her. She was trying to play us with fake credentials." "Fake?" Amara's voice sharpened, slicing through the air. "My clearance badge can be verified with one phone call." The sergeant hesitated. His jaw tightened. A flicker of uncertainty passed, then was swallowed by the blue wall of loyalty. "Book her," he muttered. The process began. Cold fingerprints pressed into ink. A camera flashed in her face, capturing a mugshot she would never forget. Through it all, Amara stood still. Her eyes were fire, but her body was stone. They wanted her broken. They would not have it. Hours passed. She was left in a holding cell, metal bench cold against her back. Her cuffs were finally removed, but red welts marked her skin. She sat in silence, waiting, calculating. The ticking clock began, because she knew her aide at the Pentagon would start to worry. Her absence would not go unnoticed, and when questions started reaching the wrong ears, the truth would surface, violently, if necessary. But here, in this small-town station, the officers gloated. She could hear them laughing outside the cell. "General, my ass, wait till the boys hear about this. Some lady thought she could boss us around. Bet she's just another fraud trying to act important." Their words rolled through the thin walls, meant to diminish, meant to strip away the last pieces of her dignity. But what they didn't realize was that Amara had endured far worse. She had been underestimated her entire life, she had been doubted, dismissed, and disrespected, and she had risen above every time. Finally, one officer came to the bars. He leaned casually, smirk plastered across his face. "Still think you're a general, huh?" Amara's gaze met his, unwavering. "I don't think I'm a general, I'm one. And when this night is over, you'll remember it for the rest of your life." The smirk faltered, just slightly, but arrogance was quick to fill the gap. Big words for someone behind bars. He turned, keys jangling, laughter trailing behind him. But Amara's words lingered. The seed of doubt had been planted. As the hours dragged on, Amara knew her moment was coming. She only needed one phone call, the right phone call, and when it happened, everything would change. The cell was quiet, too quiet. The hum of the fluorescent bulb above her was the only sound that kept her tethered to the present. Amara sat on the metal bench, her posture impossibly straight. Even in captivity, she carried herself like a commander. But inside, her patience thinned. Every tick of the wall clock was another insult, another injustice piled atop a lifetime of fighting to be seen. Then, footsteps. The officer with a smirk returned, keys clinking in his hand. He tapped the bars. Phone call time. Don't take too long. Not that you've got anyone important to call. The sneer in his voice was meant to sting. Instead, Amara's lips curved into the faintest smile. Because this was the moment she had been waiting for, they led her into a small room, a scratched-up phone bolted to the wall. The officer leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching, smug. Amara lifted the receiver. She dialed a number from memory, no hesitation, no fumbling. Her life had been built on precision. The line clicked. A voice answered instantly. General Johnson, where are you? Her aide's tone was sharp, urgent. The Pentagon had already noticed her absence. Good. I'm being unlawfully detained by local police, Amara said clearly, her eyes never leaving the officers. I am at the East Ridge substation. I require immediate assistance. There was silence on the line for a heartbeat. Then steel. Understood, ma'am. Hold tight. We're on it. Click. She hung up the receiver. The officer laughed. Nice try. Who is that? Your cousin. Amara's gaze was unflinching. You'll find out soon enough. Back at the Pentagon, the aide moved fast. Calls went out. Alarms rippled through the chain of command. Within minutes, senior officials knew a decorated general was sitting in a small-town holding cell. The outrage was immediate. This wasn't just about disrespect. It was about optics, politics, justice. Because if word spread that one of the nation's most decorated generals had been handcuffed for talking back, the backlash would shake more than just one police department. Back in the cell, Amara waited, her breathing calm, her mind razor sharp. The officers, meanwhile, laughed in the hallway. Still think she's important. Give it an hour, she'll be begging to get out of here. But then, the first ripple, the desk sergeant picked up a ringing phone. His expression shifted, frown lines deepened. He nodded stiffly, murmured into the receiver. When he hung up, sweat had formed along his hairline. Another call came, this time from Washington, then another. By the third call, the sergeant's face was pale. His eyes darted nervously toward the holding cells. What's going on? One officer asked, unease creeping into his voice. The sergeant snapped, shut up and do your job. But his voice cracked. The facade was crumbling. Minutes later, headlights swept across the station lot. Black SUVs pulled in, tires crunching gravel. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, earpieces glinting. Their stride was purposeful, their expressions cold. Inside, the front door swung open. Pentagon representatives, one of them announced, flashing credentials. Where is General Amara Johnson? The room froze. The officers who had cuffed her stared, mouths parting in disbelief. General, they had mocked her, dismissed her, called her a liar, and now the truth was standing in front of them. The suits demanded her release immediately. Papers were signed, keys rattled. The cell door creaked open. Amara stepped out with dignity intact, head held high. The marks on her wrists were visible, but her spirit was unbroken. The officer who had mocked her earlier tried to speak. His voice faltered. Ma'am, we didn't. Amara cut him off with a look so sharp it silenced the room. Save it. You made your choice. As she walked past the stunned officers, whispers erupted among the station staff. Fear spread like wildfire. Careers were flashing before their eyes. But Amara didn't stop. She moved with the same quiet authority she carried on the battlefield. Every step reminded them, she was not their victim. She was their reckoning. In the SUV outside, her aide handed her a phone. A senior general's voice boomed through the speaker. Amara, are you all right? I'm fine, she replied calmly. But those men, they crossed a line. There was no hesitation on the other end. They won't wear a badge much longer. We'll make sure of it. Amara stared out the window as the station grew smaller behind them. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about a system that believed arrogance was authority, and prejudice was power, and she would make sure the world saw the truth. That night, videos from the convenience store parking lot began flooding social media. Clips of the officers shoving her, cuffing her, ignoring her identification. The internet erupted. How do you handcuff a general? This is racism at its finest. Protect and serve? More like humiliate and abuse. The tide had turned. The power was shifting. But even as the Pentagon rallied behind her, Amara knew this fight wasn't over. The officers wouldn't go quietly. The department would scramble to cover its tracks. Excuses would be made. Stories twisted. She had the truth. They had lies. The real battle was only beginning. The storm broke at dawn. By morning, the first shaky videos from the convenience store parking lot had gone viral. Millions of views. Thousands of furious comments. A grainy clip showed General Amara Johnson standing tall in civilian clothes, calmly identifying herself, only to be shoved and handcuffed by officers who mocked her. The caption read, "Local cops arrest U.S. Army General for talking back." The outrage spread like wildfire. News anchors debated it. Veterans posted in disbelief. Young soldiers tweeted, "That's our general. She's the reason I stayed in the Army, and they treated her like that." The Pentagon issued a carefully worded statement by mid-morning. "We are aware of the unlawful detainment of Major General Amara Johnson. Investigations are underway." But behind closed doors, it wasn't calm. It was chaos. At the East Ridge Police Department, the mood flipped from arrogance to panic. Phones rang nonstop. Reporters camped outside. Protesters gathered with signs. "Respect our general. Justice for Amara. No more abuse of power." Inside, the chief paced his office, sweat pooling at his collar. The two arresting officers sat stiffly across from him, their bravado drained. "You idiots," the chief hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She was mouthing off. One officer muttered defensively, "We were just doing our jobs." "Your jobs?" The chief slammed his fist against the desk. "You handcuffed a decorated general on camera. The Pentagon is breathing down my neck. Federal attorneys are calling. You didn't just screw up, you might have cost this department its future." Silence. The weight of his words hung heavy. Meanwhile, Amara sat in a quiet Pentagon conference room. Her wrists still bore the red marks of the cuffs. Across from her, senior officials listened as she recounted every detail. Her voice was steady, but the emotion beneath it was undeniable. "They dismissed my identification. They mocked my service. They called me a liar. And when I reminded them of my rights, they claimed I was resisting. That is not law enforcement. That is abuse." The officials nodded grimly. Every word was documented, transcribed, preserved as evidence. On the table, a laptop played the viral videos. Clips showed her calm dignity, contrasted with the officer's sneering aggression. The visual evidence was undeniable. "This won't be swept under the rug," one federal attorney assured her. "Not this time." The confrontation escalated publicly. At a press conference, the East Ridge police chief tried damage control. Cameras flashed as he stammered through a statement. "This department respects the military and all who serve. We regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred last night." But reporters cut him off. "Misunderstanding? The video shows your officers handcuffing a general who identified herself. Why didn't they verify her credentials? Is this department biased against black women?" The chief's face reddened. His rehearsed lines fell apart under the onslaught. The truth was out, and no amount of spin could bury it. Behind the scenes, the Pentagon released a flood of documents to the press: Amara's service record, commendations, photographs of her in uniform receiving medals from presidents. The contrast was devastating. There she was, saluting the flag with honor. There she was, standing beside fellow generals in combat zones. And there she was, in civilian clothes, wrists shackled by local cops who sneered at her authority. The narrative was undeniable. The officers scrambled to defend themselves. One gave a shaky interview to a local paper. She was being aggressive. "We felt threatened, but the footage showed otherwise." Calm voice, still body, firm but respectful words. The more they spoke, the deeper the hole they dug. By the end of the week, both officers were suspended pending investigation. Their names circulated online, paired with headlines that would follow them forever. Their families received threats. Their careers, once sources of pride, were now tainted beyond repair. For Amara, the confrontation was not just external, it was personal. One evening, she sat in her home, phone buzzing endlessly with messages of support. Young officers she had mentored texted her. Strangers thanked her for standing tall. Mothers wrote letters. "You showed my daughter that dignity matters." Yet, in the quiet moments, Amara felt the weight of it. This was not the legacy she wanted, not defined by humiliation, but by resilience. Still, she knew one truth: the exposure was necessary. Because silence would have protected the abusers, not the abused. A congressional hearing was called. Cameras rolled as Amara testified before lawmakers. Her voice carried across the chamber, deliberate and powerful. This isn't about me alone. This is about a culture where power is weaponized against the very citizens it's meant to protect. If this can happen to me, a general with credentials in hand, imagine what happens daily to those with no rank, no platform, no one to call it the Pentagon. The room erupted in applause. Lawmakers nodded, visibly shaken. It was no longer just a local scandal, it was a national reckoning. Back at East Ridge, the officers' union tried to intervene. They demanded protection, legal defense, but public opinion had shifted too far. Even within their own ranks, support crumbled. Whispers in the hallways grew louder. They embarrassed us. They crossed the line. They've destroyed what little trust we had left. The blue wall was cracking. Amara, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't sought but couldn't ignore. She received invitations to speak at universities, veteran gatherings, civil rights rallies. Everywhere she went, people asked the same question: how did you stay so calm? How did you hold your head high? Her answer was always the same: because dignity is power, and no one, no matter their badge or their arrogance, can take that from you unless you let them. The confrontation was reaching its peak. Evidence stacked against the officers, the viral videos, eyewitness testimonies, her own Pentagon-verified credentials, a damning timeline that showed deliberate abuse. Piece by piece, their defense collapsed, and as the walls closed in, Amara knew justice was finally within reach. But the final blow was still to come. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained. Weeks later, the East Ridge Police Department was no longer the same. The 2 officers who had handcuffed Amara Johnson were officially terminated. Their badges, once symbols of authority, now sat in evidence lockers as relics of disgrace. One faced criminal charges for unlawful detainment and misconduct. The other, stripped of his pension, struggled under the weight of lawsuits. Careers that once seemed untouchable had ended with a click of handcuffs, not on their suspects, but on themselves. The department itself wasn't spared. Federal oversight descended. Policies were rewritten. Body camera regulations tightened. Mandatory training on bias and civilian rights was enforced. The small-town station that once operated with impunity now lived under a microscope. Justice had landed hard, and it left cracks that would never be repaired. For Amara, the outcome was bittersweet. She stood once again in uniform, medals gleaming, before a hall of soldiers who rose to their feet as she entered. The ovation was thunderous, not because she had fought overseas, not because she had earned ribbons of valor, but because she had shown courage in a different kind of battle, one fought not on foreign soil, but in the streets of her own country. Courage, she said in her speech, her voice resonant, is not just facing bullets. Courage is standing tall when dignity itself is under attack. Courage is refusing to bow, even when the world wants you on your knees. The room erupted again. Some soldiers wiped tears, others saluted. She had become more than a general, she was a symbol. Yet, Amara never lost sight of the deeper truth. This wasn't about me, she told a journalist afterward. This was about every person who doesn't have a Pentagon to call, about every citizen who has been silenced, humiliated, or ignored. My story just happened to be caught on camera. There's deserved justice too. Those words resonated. They echoed across television screens, social media feeds, and dinner tables. People debated, people questioned, and people demanded change. The incident became a case study at law schools, a rallying cry for civil rights activists, a reminder to police departments across the nation that power abused could destroy careers in an instant. As for Amara's personal journey, the scars lingered, the marks on her wrists faded, but the memory never would. Yet she chose not to let bitterness define her. Instead, she founded a program for veterans and civilians alike, teaching resilience in the face of injustice, workshops on knowing your rights, mentorship for young officers of color, partnerships with communities to rebuild trust. What had been meant to humiliate her became fuel for something greater. One evening, long after the noise had quieted, Amara walked once more past a convenience store where it all began. The parking lot was empty. The fluorescent sign flickered. She paused, hands in her pockets, breathing in the night air. This was where she had been underestimated. This was where arrogance thought it could strip her of dignity. This was where she had been placed in cuffs. And this was where justice had begun. She smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in peace, because she knew the truth. Justice is not revenge. Justice is accountability. And accountability had arrived, as certain as the dawn. The officers would never forget the night they thought they were untouchable. The community would never forget the sight of their general standing tall in chains. And the nation would never forget the reminder that even in the face of injustice, Dignity is the weapon that cannot be broken. Do you think the punishment these officers faced was enough? Or should the consequences have been even harsher? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And that is the story of General Amara Johnson, a story of arrogance meeting its end, a story of justice, delayed but not denied, a story reminding us that true power doesn't come from a badge or a weapon, it comes from integrity, dignity, and the courage to stand tall when others try to break you. For Amara, this wasn't just about herself, it was about every voice silenced unfairly, every person humiliated for daring to demand respect, every injustice swept under the rug until someone finally said, enough. Stories like this are why I do what I do. They take time, effort, and heart to bring to life. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can keep shining a light on injustice, and on the power of resilience, because justice is not just a dream, it's a fight, and it's a fight worth telling.